So today, Nvidia announced the RTX 4000 series that they've been hoarding from us in a warehouse for a couple of months, and yeah, it's expensive. No, I guess the 4090 isn't over $2,000 in the United States on paper based on its founder's MSRP, but $1,600, that's not cheap. At least it's not cheap in my opinion, and I think it might be good for a lot of people to remind themselves what happened to Nvidia's MSRPs 2 years ago as I covered it. Additionally, there's something that I suspect a lot of people have missed, that the RTX 4080 12GB 4070, sorry, something in my throat, it seems to not have a founder's cooler. That means there is no reference model of the 4080 12GB graphics card anchoring it to its MSRP of $900. So AIBs can just run wild. And I just think there's no way around it. The 4080, or what should have been the 4070, that I was hoping could at least be $700 no matter what they called it, they're going to say it's $900, but it's probably going to start more around $1,000, and that's going to push up the majority of the supply of 4080 16GB models above $1,200, and I just expect the 4090 to also drift closer to $2,000 during its launch month as well. Now, is this just because Nvidia is greedy? The answer is actually a little more complicated than you might think. You see, Lovelace was designed a few years ago, right? They started working on Lovelace before Ampere came out, and once they tuned it, finalized the architecture, that was during the heyday of the mining boom, of the GPU shortages in early 2021. That would have been right when they were putting the finishing touches on the design, and there's just no way around it. Lovelace truly was designed with the mindset that graphics cards will sell no matter how you price them, and that people are just thirsty for ultimate performance at the expense of everything else, including power usage, and AMD would be remaining in the rear view mirror. Lovelace was designed for peak performance at the expense of everything else, and that includes cost to produce. And I truly am getting the impression after multiple conversations with contacts today that Lovelace costs at least 50% more to make per tier compared to Ampere. The reason you're seeing Nvidia call what should be an RTX 4070 and RTX 4080 12GB is because this thing costs at least 50% more to make than the RTX 3070, which means it costs more to make than an RTX 3080 that EVGA has already gone on record saying they couldn't profit at that easily below MSRP. And so it all lines up. Lovelace is priced the way it is because Nvidia is getting greedy, but it's not because they're getting greedy for greedy's sake. They really did just design an architecture that's this expensive to make and sell. And speaking of EVGA leaving Nvidia, I do want to point a couple of things out regarding that evolving story. You see, if you've been following Moore's Law is Dead for the past couple of years, EVGA leaving Nvidia wouldn't have been a surprise. All of the factors they stated for why they have to leave Nvidia, for why making their graphics cards isn't profitable for them anymore, but how Nvidia is abusive towards them, that's something Moore's Law is Dead has been covering for a long time now. And really, this situation isn't that surprising. But honestly, EVGA is playing this smart. It wasn't a leak. EVGA wanted everybody to know that they were leaving Nvidia and why, so they can control the narrative. And so far, it's going in their favor. If you go online right now, people are furious about Lovelace's prices. EVGA primed the internet to be extra critical of Nvidia right when Nvidia was going to announce something, and the internet is being extra critical of Nvidia. I mean, that AMA on Reddit was a full-on mutiny. But keep in mind, guys, you can yell as much as you want, and I'm not telling you not to, and I'm definitely not telling you to just go out and buy a $900 70 class card. Don't worry, I'm not saying you should, but I do have to remind you all that Nvidia is doing this because they really do have at least a year's worth of stock of Ampere cards to go through. Today, at their Lovelace reveal, they straight up kept the Ampere lineup in their overall GeForce lineup, making it clear that these old cards are not being replaced until you guys buy them. And I do expect Nvidia to flood the market with the 4090 this fall, but everything below that, I think there's going to be some supply throttling as they try to direct people every now and then with ebb and flow to buy old Ampere stock, and they won't truly unleash all of the 40, 80, 12 gigabyte stock until they have finished selling off Ampere. And we're just going to have to see if that works out for them. This is how they're trying to handle the situation, and it looks really crappy, but, well, I don't know. I don't have anything else to add to that. It looks crappy. But there are some things that Nvidia showed off today that don't look crappy to me, that look legitimately impressive. And I've been reaching out to contacts all day to get a little bit of input on what we should be looking out for as we get closer to review day of Lovelace. And, well, I also have some whispers about RDNA 3 and about upcoming other Lovelace products that I want to tell you about. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Reese, what's this? Are you having trouble understanding how Moore's Law is Dead is organized? Well, you should use the org. This piece of content is sponsored by the org. The org is a powerful tool for professionals looking to advance their careers with the world's first truly transparent professional network that includes over 60,000 org charts of the world's top companies. It is designed for high-growth professionals who want to find who they need to find to get work done. And the org openly shows off company structures and people. Like other platforms, the org is truly public and truly free. Easily navigate to any organization's teams, whether remote, distributed, or decentralized, and then build relationships with the personnel you need to work with and understand how your colleagues work as well and who they work with. If you'd like to support me and the channel, sign up for the org using my link below. It's free and it really does help Moore's Law is Dead. It's a great way to show support. Support Moore's Law is Dead and support your ability to find the colleagues you need to work with at the org today. Alright, so before I get to the RDNA 3 and Lovelace Whispers, I want to talk about two things that actually impressed me a lot at GTC today. And the first one is DLSS 3.0, which makes some pretty incredible claims, and at least in the shots they showed, looked really good. But notice most of the shots of gameplay with DLSS 3.0 seem to be when like a vehicle's moving in a straight line. And I'm wondering if that's a coincidence or not, because, well, this is when things start getting above my head. I am not a computer hardware engineer or software engineer, but from what I've been warned, DLSS 3.0 might have some artifacting issues when there's a ton of movement on screen, and it might not get you as much better latency as the higher frame rates would suggest based on how it works. In other words, DLSS 3.0 seems like something that's a bit more complicated than how 2.0 works, and I think we have to be a little skeptical and a little concerned that there could be DLSS 1.0-like issues. Having said that, I don't expect DLSS 1.0-like issues. I just don't think Nvidia would make the same mistakes twice. They don't typically do things like that. But this is something where you're just going to have to wait for reviews, and I do suspect there will be some limitations, especially because, at least at first, it's only going to be supported on Lovelace. And man, the developers I talked to hate that. They don't want to bother with stuff that they can't put on the box and know 90% of their user base will be able to use. They love FSR, and they like that DLSS is now being supported by the overwhelming majority of cards people have bought in the past year, and this throws a wrench into that. But again, they're limiting it to Lovelace, I believe, mostly because they need to try to get you to spend the extra money for graphics cards that really shouldn't cost this much, but they have to because they're expensive and because they need to get rid of Ampere stock that's still selling for prices, well, that some AIBs couldn't even support. So the other thing, though, that impressed me besides DLSS 3.0 was the ray tracing claims, which, yeah, it's been hard to put a real peg on what we should expect out of Lovelace's ray tracing over rasterization performance. And to be clear, though, there are some very different claims being made.
Compared to the world's reigning GPU champion, the 3090 Ti, 4090 is 2 times faster on Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Right, so if you say it's 2x, that just sounds like it's in line with the rasterization increase. And I understand in this canned benchmark,
4 times faster on Racer X.
They made to show how good Lovelace is. They can get up to 4x, but that makes me really suspicious. This is, again, one of those things where it's like, all right, Lovelace is clearly a bigger uplift in ray tracing over Ampere than what Ampere brought over Turing. Cool, but 2x to 4x is a huge range, and I suspect that there's going to be a lot of games where it's just a little bit bigger than the uplift Ampere brought over raster, which is to say, if you're getting a doubling in raster performance with Lovelace over Ampere, you're probably going to get a bit above double the ray tracing performance. Like, so with just raster, it's about double. With ray tracing turned on, it's like around 2.5x the performance of Ampere, which is impressive. But again, I think we need to be skeptical here. Although I will say this, I have been told by a couple of contacts already that AMD does not expect to beat Lovelace's ray tracing. Look, they have no doubt they're going to crush Ampere's ray tracing, but they were mostly hoping to tie Lovelace. They were hoping Lovelace would bring a ray tracing uplift over Ampere that was a bit over double the performance increase, right? So again, like I said, a bit more than what their raster brought. It seems like it's more like 2.5x what Ampere was, and AMD does not expect to be, well, 3 or 4x what RDNA 2 was. At least that's not what it sounds like to me right now, but I still don't have an exact number. But now that I've gotten the bad news out of the way for AMD fanboys, I want to get to some good RDNA 3 news for, well, the entire market. It has to do with production costs. And if I put these quotes on screen, we can see one of my sources tells me that Navi 31, of course, costs more to make than Navi 21, but it's not as much more as some people would think. It's not like Ampere to Lovelace. Only part of the configuration is 5 nanometer, and the board costs between 21 and 31 are very similar. So because AMD isn't going crazy with some elaborate cooling, the board cost, the cooling is about the same as before. The silicon cost is a bit more, but that's not even half the cost of the card. It's honestly coming down to just the extra amount of money in RAM, basically, and then a little extra on top of that. I'm not going to put an exact number out there yet, but AMD doesn't have to charge nearly as much more for RDNA 3 over RDNA 2 as Nvidia is for Lovelace over Ampere. And if they don't mark it up more than they have to, they're still making a bigger margin than Nvidia is, which is exciting. In fact, another source who works at an AIB told me that they are more excited than ever to support AMD this time around because they truly expect AMD's bombs to allow profits at MSRP much more easily than Nvidia will. And they will also be excited to support both of the SKUs AMD is launching this year as soon as they can. And I had another source back this up before I started recording the video that it seems like AMD will be launching 2 SKUs this November. So I've already confirmed it's launching in November. So yeah, I believe that's the 7900 XT and the 7800 XT. And I don't think they're going to have to cost as much more than last gen unless AMD gets greedy, which I can't promise you they won't, but it doesn't need to. Finally, a third source tells me that AMD is considering launching a very highly overclocked top-tier model, but for right now, they just don't see the point in pushing power consumption until Gen 5 PCIe support is widespread in power supplies, which is interesting. This shows a divergence in how Nvidia and AMD are looking at this generation. You see, Nvidia seems to think that they need to go for top performance no matter what, and they're just barely deciding to not go for something like 600 watts. In fact, I had a source reach out to me and tell me that there are 600 watt models waiting, but that already they're worried the 450 watt models that spike to 660 watts or higher might break some of the cheaper Gen 5 PCIe power supplies. And so Nvidia is just going to stop right about where the limit is until good, well-tested power supplies by them are on the market, and then they'll consider launching a 4090 Ti or Titan, and that'll have the added benefit of waiting to see how good the 7900 XT is. This isn't AMD. AMD may launch some 450 or 500 watt insane mega card next year, but if they do, that's when they'll do it. right now, they don't see a point in pushing power up 50% for 10 or 20% more performance until, well, they go all out, and they don't think the market is ready with good enough power supplies for graphics cards like that yet. And make no mistake, Jensen directly hinted at these insane models in their labs.
And you can really push ADA. We've overclocked ADA past 3 gigahertz in our labs.
And if we go to Nvidia's website, they evoke words like ultra, fastest, rockets, premium, and power. They want to sell you on a premium graphics card that throws out everything else at the expense of performance, including power consumption and production costs. Now, when you go to AMD's page that they just put out talking about the benefits of performance per watt to gamers, it's quite different. Now, sure, they say things like leadership performance and, this is the best for you, but you can see that they seriously think that not throwing out power consumption is important. And so there you go. AMD isn't going crazy until they decide it's worth it to go crazy, and they just don't think it is right now. They know we're in a recession. They know their architecture doesn't cost as much more to make as Nvidia's does, and so, well, as long as you get a decent cooler that keeps it quiet below 350 watts, that's the way to go for now. And again, like I've said in recent videos, if AIBs want to go insane, AMD will let them, and they'll let them handle the warranties. But that is not what Nvidia is deciding to do here. Nvidia has been hoarding cards for months. They cost a lot to make, and they've got a narrow window to sell as many as possible to the top-end gamers above $1,000 as they can before RDNA 3 launches. And so, look, they push these cards very hard, and they're going to charge you for them. And yeah, I guess to recap, that's what you guys should expect then. Expect decent launch volume of the RTX 4090 in October. The first week can always be messy, but at least in October, I would expect to be able to get a 4090. I can't promise you they'll be at MSRP, but we'll just have to wait and see. They'll be at MSRP if no one buys them, but AIBs think people will. And then AMD will launch the RDNA 3 cards that won't break the bank as much as Nvidia. Again, I don't think they're going to be cheap, to be honest. And, well, they're just going to both wait to see how things shake out, wait for better power supplies to come, and then I honestly think we're going to see the true showdown for the crown actually around mid-next year between the 4090 Ti or Titan and the 7950 XT. And I'm not saying AMD can't win the performance crown this year, but if they do, it seems unlikely they'll win the ray tracing crown. And in fact, it's just more important to them this fall, a fall that sees a recession, for Nvidia to be the one known as being the hot graphics card company breaking power supplies. AMD really wants Nvidia to be known to be that company for once and try to get rid of that stigma from themselves. All right, so what else is there to say today? Well, what are the other things I noticed in the Lovelace presentation? Apparently, it only supports DisplayPort 1.4a, not 2.0. I don't know how big of a deal that really is, but that's disappointing to me. Additionally, still just PCIe 4.0. Again, I don't think that will be a big deal, but worth mentioning. I also found it odd that the RTX 4080 is a 3-slot card if it's only 320 watts. I'm not really sure what that's about. And I thought the RTX mod initiative was cool. Good idea by Nvidia to just start putting out ray tracing mods for as many easy-to-run games as possible. That's smart, if this is an advantage they have, and I think ray tracing is still a big advantage they will have this generation, just like last one. And, well, I guess the only other thing I really want to do is close on this.
3080 is faster than 2080 Ti. 3080 is twice the performance of 2080 at the same price. Ampere is the biggest generational leap we've ever had. The 3090 is so big that for the very first time, we can play games at 60 frames per second in 8K.
Don't forget that Nvidia made some pretty absurd claims with Ampere, just like they are with Lovelace. Now, the claims are bigger this time, but wait for reviews before you swallow every number they throw out there like it's gospel. And that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you don't miss the ongoing Lovelace RDNA 3, Zen 4, Raptor Lake, and so on coverage throughout the rest of this year. And, well, if you have the extra money, consider supporting us on Patreon. We are recording a die shrink early with our reactions and talking directly to the patrons about their reactions to the initial Lovelace reveal. That will be coming out early only to patrons this week. So there's so much extra content that's ad-free out there for you if you support us on Patreon. We can't do this without our patrons. But otherwise, thank you for watching.